please speak as you might to a young child or a golden retriever.
But speaking of China, there was an interesting headline that kind of falls right into your lap as one of those fun conversations to have regarding Iraq and their adoption of the yuan. Do you want to share a little bit on that?
Yeah. And I'm going to use this story to try to make a little more point. I'm not going to get on my soapbox too long, but I am going to use this to make a point. So there was a headline that came out yesterday that basically said the Iraqi central bank announced that now they were going to be doing trade with China in yuan. And of course, many of the dollar bears and the China ascending to the top and the yuan taking over as a competitor currency seized on this to say, see, now, China is importing oil from Iraq and they're paying for it in yuan. And this will relieve the pressure of, the dollar shortage. And this is another step towards ending the petrodollar. Well, it turns out that if you actually read the article and then not only just read the article, if you actually asked a few people who know what they're talking about and do a little research on it, you find out that the headline is actually the exact opposite of that. So oil is not included in this. Oil is excluded from this Chinese Iraqi yuan trade. So the oil trade still takes place in dollars. And it's not even that China is going to pay yuan for other Iraqi exports, because Iraq doesn't export really much of anything other than oil to China, which is still being done in dollars. What it relates to is the fact that Iraq has a severe dollar shortage, and their severe dollar shortage is hurting the exchange rate with the Iraqi dinar. And so what it relates to is now Iraq is going to pay for imports from China in yuan. And the reason they want to use yuan is they don't want to use dollars because they need the dollars for other stuff. And so so it's actually the exact opposite of what everybody jumped on the headline about. Not only that, but this started going around Twitter a little bit, and I pointed out that this oil was excluded from this, and then somebody else pointed out, well, yeah, but since 2009, it isn't done in dollars, because since 2019, the oil trade between Iraq and China is done based on a barter deal, where China was going to provide construction to Iraq, and in exchange, Iraq would provide oil to China. And so they were saying, no, there is no dollar oil trade between Iraq and China. Well, this isn't true either. Back in 2019, they did announce this. They did announce this barter deal. But at the time, it was only going to be for 100,000 barrels a day. And there's about $1 million of barrels a day that Iraq ships to China. So it was only 10% of the total. It was never a huge percent of the overall total. Well, then you come to find out that the reality is even though this deal was put on paper, it was never actually implemented. So over the last 3 or 4 years, all the trade between Iraq and China, even up to today, it's done in dollars. So this is not a huge de-dollarization win for China, who is now buying oil from Iraq in yuan. And I'm not sitting here saying that this could never happen. And when I first saw the headline, I thought that that's probably what it meant too. But the difference is I actually did a little research on it, and you figure out that it's not. And so this is not me saying that I'm smarter than anybody else. This is me trying to encourage people that when you first see a headline, don't just automatically assume that it's 100% correct, because it's usually not. And the other thing is that part of the reason that I probably hit back so hard on my whole dollar thesis is exactly the reason that we saw yesterday, when people see a headline and they automatically 100% assume that it means that the dollar is done for. And to be honest, I'm really trying to counteract this a little bit, because I think a lot of times, to your point earlier, you get the quick hit, you get the narrative, you hear it, and you accept it as 100% true, and you move on, right? And I would just encourage people not to accept everything at face value. Don't take the quick hit and move on. Take the time to actually really read through it and understand what's happening. At some point, the dollar is probably going to lose its global reserves currency status. History tells us this is what has happened. The reason I'm out here saying don't get so excited about it is because it is incredibly hard to do this. It is incredibly hard to unseat a hegemon. It's not impossible. History tells us it happens, but it is really, really, really difficult.
Yeah. Hold your horses should be like the subtitle under the milkshake theory. Just chill out for a minute. So Google has a thing that's called ad blindness, where if you do like a heat map that shows clicks, we've gotten so accustomed to the fact that you search for something and the first 3 or 4 results are ads that you start to block them out, and the entire side panels are ads. You completely ignore it, and you look at this kind of like click pattern, and everything just kind of skips over that. Well, for a long time, we knew what clickbait was. We knew that these headlines were written in a way just to get us hooked in, just to create this stir, and not so much stir like you're triggering me with this idea. You're triggering somebody or creating this polarized conversation purely based on headline, because people have they now have clickbait blindness, right? They're no longer paying attention to the fact that clearly this headline is just meant to bait me, and they take the bait, and you get into these like very futile conversations because no one's really stepping into that debate with a grounded sense of what the information is. They haven't read the article. They hadn't watched your video debate. It's just an immediate reaction based on what they hold to be completely fact and undisputable because of a narrative they fell in love with previously. And it's interesting to kind of see some of that unfold constantly around the same theme. And one of the things that I think it's worth highlighting, because we do talk about it, you talk about it often, but sometimes you're coming in to this conversation, the dollar milkshake conversation, or anything that's relative to, the topic of the day for our financial system, and you miss some of these nuances. Like, okay, there's this conversation around potentially changing what currency we're using for trade, but the reason they're doing that is because the dollars are still so sacred. And you see that in these articles about governments selling their treasuries. See, I told you, Brent, they're de-dollarizing, they're getting rid of this. And it's like, no, they're just defending their currency because everybody wants dollars and nobody wants their currency. And the only way to do that is to sell the bonds. Yeah. So a lot of people don't necessarily take a step back to look at that. And they have this, narrative blindness, and it becomes this futile debate without realizing that things are relative. And one more point I'll add to that, based on the things that you're highlighting here, is the timeline. Like, the time horizon is so critical here. You're not going to wake up tomorrow because Iraq is scared to sell their dollars and has some hokey deal with China, which normally you wouldn't even hear about, except there's an entire polarized part of the world that wants the dollar hegemony to end. So as soon as they get something like this, they post clickbait. So when you're seeing something like this, you're not actually taking a moment to step back and think about it and put it into context as to what's going on in the bigger picture, and realize that even if this is true, even if your version of this story is 100% accurate, it doesn't mean the U.S. is going to lose the reserve currency status tomorrow.
Right.